Linda's leather notebook sat untouched for years, buried under yarn scraps and half-finished sudokus, until a stranger community center clutched her wrist. "You gotta spill how you make words sing," they blurted. Linda, 50 and skeptical, almost laughed. Her. A writer. Toronto's gray skies agreed. But that night, fingertips hovering over crisp pages, she joined a virtual journaling circle, screen names glowing like fireflies. Between sips of chamomile tea gone cold, she spilled decades of mom vibes, solo grocery trips. Linda's fingers hovered over that leather notebook, its spine cracked like forgotten promises. 50 years of life had etched grooves into her palms, but none deeper than hollow ache left when her youngest drove off to McGill. Toronto's autumn light slanted through blinds, dust motes dancing where soccer cleats once tumbled. She snorted her own hesitation. Since when did a woman who'd survived 3 decades of packed lunches and science fairs get spooked by blank pages? Community center flyers piled on counter promised pottery classes and bridge clubs, but it was a pixelated ad for a virtual journaling circle that snagged her. Midnight Muses, it read, for souls who miss hum of a full house. Linda tapped join before courage could flee, then spilled chai on her sweatpants. Classic. That first entry smelled of bergamot and hesitation. She wrote about how silence now had weight, how her empty nest felt less like freedom, and more like a stage after plays ended. But as ink bled into paper, something loosened, a knot she'd mistaken for part of her ribs. Notebook's leather, worn smooth from years wedged between cookbooks, remembered her. It had witnessed grocery lists and half-finished poems scribbled during piano recitals. Now it held her new rhythm, grief, then grace. By week 3, her entries grew playful. She described neighbor's yappy terrier as a sock with a vendetta, confessed to eating ice cream straight from carton like a rebellious teen. Midnight Muses cheered her on with heart emojis and stories of their own, women from Brisbane to Boston, all stitching their next chapters together. One evening, Linda caught her reflection in Kettle's curve and grinned. Not silver streaking her curls, but woman leaning in. Linda's fingers hovered over that leather notebook, its spine cracked from neglect but still smelling faintly of cedar. 50 years old and suddenly alone in her Toronto condo, she'd convinced herself journaling was for teenagers or those wellness influencers with too much time. But one rainy afternoon, while reorganizing a junk drawer, a classic avoidance tactic, she unearthed it beneath expired coupons and a lone Scrabble tile, cue, of course, because life enjoyed irony. On a whim, she scribbled 3 lines, daughter's dorm room smelled like microwave popcorn. Forgot how quiet socks are on hardwood. Why does grocery store suddenly stock family-sized everything? It wasn't poetry, but her chest unclenched just a fraction. Then fate, or maybe Wi-Fi, intervened. A pop-up ad for a virtual journaling circle glowed on her laptop. For women who've misplaced their plot twists, it teased. She snorted but clicked. Turned out, group was run by a retired librarian named Marjorie, 72, who wore cat-eye glasses and called journaling soul archaeology. Members spanned time zones, a Kyoto potter, a Brooklyn bus driver, even a sheep farmer from Wales who wrote in Welsh. Linda's first attempt read like a grocery list, but Marjorie praised her honest vibes and suggested trying prompts. Describe a memory using only smells. What would your younger self toss you like a bouquet? Slowly, Linda's entries grew legs. She wrote about her mother's habit of humming off-key in church, way her ex-husband always burned toast but pretended it was Cajun style. One night, she spilled ink over a childhood memory of catching fireflies in jars, how their glow had seemed like magic until she'd learned it was a mating call. Turns out loneliness can be a language too, she scrawled, then blinked her own words. Marjorie nudged her toward Toronto's artsy annex neighborhood, where a community center hosted a monthly journal jam. Creator arrived clutching her notebook like a shield, but room buzzed with women of all ages, some in sequins, others in gardening clogs, exchanging pages like secret recipes. A woman with neon pink streaks in her hair winked. Nice vintage, she said, nodding leather cover. Bet it's got stories baked in. By spring, she filled 2 notebooks. She taped in subway tickets, a pressed maple leaf, a receipt from her first solo movie. She'd cried a cartoon. Leather grew supple again, softened by use. One evening, she caught herself grinning as she wrote, "Today, I bought a single cupcake. Didn't even share frosting." Somewhere between Welsh farmers' haikus and Marjorie's insistence that grief is just love with a squint, Linda realized empty nest hadn't shrunk her life, it had just cleared space for a new season. And this time, she got to narrate it herself. Linda's fingers hovered over that leather notebook like it might bite. 50 years old and suddenly afraid of paper, ridiculous. But grief had a way of turning ordinary things into landmines. 3 weeks since her youngest left for university, and her quiet Toronto condo felt less like a sanctuary, more like a museum of her former life. Community center brochures piled up unread, even her favorite diner booth seemed too wide without gangly limbs spilling into her space. Then came virtual journaling circle, some Zoom group her neighbor swore by. Linda logged in out of sheer stubbornness, determined to prove self-help wasn't her vibe. Yet there they were, women from Boise to Brisbane, scribbling away like their pens could exorcise loneliness. One shared how listing stupid little joys, warm socks, way light hit her teapot, rewired her brain. Another cracked wise about outliving her plant collection. Dry humor, no platitudes, just people refusing to let loss have last word. That notebook became her sparring partner. Some days she rage wrote about mismatched socks left behind, others, she mapped memories like a detective, tracing how laughter used to ricochet off these walls. She stumbled, once filling pages with grocery lists before catching herself, but kept pushing. Leather grew supple under her grip, a tactile reminder that resilience wasn't about grand gestures but showing up, ink-stained and imperfect. By winter's end, Linda's entries had edges of curiosity. She noticed how frost-etched balcony glass in fractal patterns, how her hands looked more like her mother's now. Circle cheered her small wins, she repaid them by admitting she'd finally tried pickleball, 50-year-old knees are traitors. Grief hadn't vanished, but it shared space with something new, a quiet thrill in rediscovering who she was when no one needed feeding. That notebook, once a relic, now held proof, emptiness could be reshaped, one stubborn page at a time. Linda's fingers hovered over that leather notebook, its spine cracked from years of neglect. Dust shimmered under afternoon light as she cracked it open, empty pages staring back, daring her to fill them. 50 years old, kids gone, house too quiet, and here she was, staring down blankness like some kind of midlife showdown. Toronto's community center bulletin board caught her eye next morning, virtual journaling circle, healing through words. Skeptical. Absolutely. But desperation had vibes stronger than pride. She logged on, expecting cringe, found instead a mosaic of faces, women scribbling, laughing, some sniffling. One even waved, ink smudged on her cheek. Linda's first entry was a mess. Why does my fridge hum louder than my thoughts? Not Pulitzer material, but damn if it didn't unclog something. Weeks in, leather notebook now stuffed with grocery lists, rants about subway delays, a haiku about her neighbor's yappy chihuahua. Then came Center's annual Art of Everyday Life exhibit. Linda hesitated, who cared about her ramblings? But that notebook had become a lifeline. Gutsy move, she submitted it, sprawled open on a pedestal, pages fluttering under a spotlight. Opening night. Crowds milled past pottery and watercolors until, gasps. A cluster formed around her display. Some woman in a fur-trimmed coat, who'd earlier scoffed doodle therapy, stood frozen, eyes glistening. This, she muttered, is me. Phones lifted. Flashbulbs popped. Linda's chicken scratch confession about stealing her son's leftover Halloween candy had gone viral by midnight. Back home, she traced notebook's embossed edges. Social media buzzed, real not perfect, 50 and flourishing. Messages flooded in, you wrote my loneliness. How'd you nail my mom guilt? Linda smirked, recalling her pen's tiny coffee stain on page 12, proof life wasn't pristine. As notifications pinged, she inked one last line, this is my start. Outside, city lights blurred into possibility. That leather-bound thing. No longer just pages. A rebellion. Linda's leather notebook, once buried under years of unused cookbooks and half-knit scarves, now sat cracked open on her kitchen counter, its pages filled with ink-smudged confessions and grocery lists that somehow always ended in poetry. 50 never felt so alive. Toronto's grey winters used to amplify her empty nest silence, but this year, woman traded sighing socked-up windows for scribbling in that notebook like her sanity depended on it. She joined a virtual journaling circle, a ragtag group of women from Nebraska to Newfoundland who shared stories over pixelated coffee dates. Turns out, midlife crises pair well with Wi-Fi and whimsy. Her entries started as grief's grocery lists, missing Sam's laundry piles, but morphed into love letters to her own next act. She wrote about rediscovering community centers, where she now taught a workshop, typo intentional, renewal sounded jazzier. Her students, women with decades of untold stories, clutched their own notebooks like lifelines. Linda's quirky habit. Ending each session by reading aloud a random old diary entry, usually some mortifying 1980s crush rant, just to prove growth smells like embarrassment and lavender. That leather notebook, once stiff with neglect, now flopped open with dog-eared ease. Its spine creased where woman had pressed too hard writing about her first solo trip to Algonquin Park, where she'd held loons because why not? Vibes, apparently, were contagious. Her online circle ballooned into a movement, women swapping prompts, crowdfunding journals for shelters, even mailing each other mystery stickers to paste next to vulnerable entries. One evening, Linda thumbed through early pages, wincing her own shaky script, "House too quiet. Who am I now?" She grinned, adding a fresh line below, "Turns out, me, just louder, messier, and with better Wi-Fi. Grab your pen, your next chapter's waiting in margins."